Welcome to the Adam Fitch Podcast. I'm the host Adam Fitch, and today I'm joined by Derek Moses Moseley. He's a PUBG content creator, caster, analyst, and all around just a great guy. Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Happy to do so.
Okay, so since you're deeply embedded in the PUBG esports scene, and I guess PUBG at large, I feel like that would be the best topics to go into. So I guess I'd say, like, why esports and why PUBG? So how did you get your start in everything here?
Well, I started by creating content. I was new to everything. I had been working full time for a long time. PUBG had come out a little bit after I had started making my first couple of YouTube videos, and I started making content there. And it was relatively well received. And that August, I think the first couple of leagues started to pop up, the first of which was PUBG Online. Mm-hmm. I was always very interested in casting and that kind of stuff. So I just sent a message to one of the guys, Matchmaking, actually, who's just recently cast PGC. So he's a good friend of mine, asking how I could get into it. And he was like, yeah, come try it out. So that's how I got started.
Okay, so we'll talk about the current state of the game, right? So you play it a lot more than me. I'm absolutely arse on PC, so that limits the amount of games I can play, right? And plus, I'm probably just not good enough. But people, both fans and players, everyone really has come out and said they've always got criticisms about the game, both on a casual basis and competitive, right? How do you think things are? Do you think the game's esports ready? Two, have all the bugs kind of been taken out? Is it a smooth game now, or is it still in a bad place?
I would say that PUBG is probably in the best place it's ever been. Now, the game came out with an untold amount of bugs and optimization issues, and PUBG Corp has done a terrific job actually improving the game to a point now where it's never been better, but it's also got a long way to go. So it's a lot better than it was. But as far as the esports side is concerned, I think that there is certainly still potential there, not only for improvement, but just honing the way that the game is produced and promoted.
Okay.
That's basically where I'm at right now, is looking at the next step. But yeah, there's been tried and true tournaments over the last couple of years that have shown that there is great potential for exciting esports content there.
I agree. So I tuned into PGI last year in Berlin, and that was great, And I think I kind of feel like it's been a bit of a backstep going into leagues. At first I thought it was a good idea because Rainbow Six did it pretty well, but I kind of feel like PUBG esports is better suited to tournaments. I know that the more games there are, the more you can kind of eliminate some of the random elements of the game and create more consistent results. But I think it's that this first year hasn't been great, and I definitely think prominent people in the scene, so like Nip's coach, for example, kind of came at me, but tagged me and stuff yesterday, and I gave my opinion. I think several aspects of everything that's gone in the past year have been crap, and he just didn't reply. So I don't know how much people actually believe that everything's perfect and everything's rosy, or if people are just acting like it's to obviously just to keep the peace with the powers that be.
Well, the thing is that it's a difficult battle, because PUBG is a game that you can play in so many different ways, and it started as this casual sensation where, messing around and hilarious hijinks was kind of what gave PUBG its initial popularity. So the move to a more serious mode, a more serious league setup, I think was the right idea at the time, considering that every tournament in the last couple of years before the Pro League was different rule sets, different point structures, different teams being invited versus qualifying. So going to a competitive integrity model where everybody qualifies, save for a couple of the big names, but they still had to fight their way to stay in the leagues. That in itself is a good idea. But how the game and the leagues kind of materialized was janky. Like PEL took a really long time to start.
Yeah.
NPL started before. Different amounts of games for NPL, different amounts of games for PEL. There's the Asian leagues have different point structures and that kind of thing. So there is not a really still true unification. But we kind of chalked it up internally as people close to the scene as the first year, knocking off the issues that might arise. But ultimately, the biggest shortcoming, I think, at least in this first year, was just how the leagues were promoted, which were done regionally, but not in a way that would really draw an audience from the casual player base, people that just log in to play, had no idea for the most part when games were going on aside from like a small banner ad in the client.
Yeah. Well, I also think something I dropped the ball on massively, PUBG Corp, and I guess the tournament organisers that are working with them on these leagues, is communication. So as you say, like the PEL started late. It was supposed to start in February, I believe, and then ended up going into March. And it only there was only communication once I published a story about it being delayed. Right. Some people kind of contested the reasoning for it and said no, that's not true. But I mean, everybody agreed that it had been pushed back, and no one said anything about it. So the players were waiting to find out what was going on. My memory might be a little bit at the time. It might be a little bit off because I mean it was beginning of the year now, right? But
yeah, I mean, my impression, at least, kind of putting two and two together, and you know, I love the Starladder guys. They've really been kind to me and have treated me well. But they were put in a really tough position because they had, you know, everything set up, and anyone who knows anything about Starladder knows that their home base is in Ukraine. And at that time, when PEL was starting up, and around the time of the PEL qualifiers, Ukraine and Russia were like really not a good place. So at that stage, I think there was a decision made, and I would like to assume that PUBG Corp probably gave this suggestion as well, saying that if, you know, there's potential for like civil unrest and, you know, warfare, really, that having everything, including their pro league, their, you know, for lack of a better term, premier league, in the sense that, you know, Europe had all the big orgs, that they didn't want them to do it in Ukraine. And they found that out really late in the process, and they had to scramble to move everything, which is, I believe, why it started so late.
That's fair enough, but I'll go back to my original communication points. I don't think that kind of improved much over the year either. So it came to PGC, and it was another story that I wrote regarding the revenue share skin. So the in-game team branded items, which a lot of teams were kind of sold on the idea of competing and investing in PUBG on, was like, right, we're going to get something back. We're going to work together. Kind of how like Rainbow Six have done things, and Rocket League have finally got there as well. And there was no communication there. Besides, they sent an email to team owners, right? But there was nothing to the players or anything. So when I published a story, and then I said, right, an announcement will come later today, and then it never actually touched on the fact that they were cancelling these items. Instead, they said, right, we've got these PGC branded items, and kind of dusted it off. So I mean, I think there's a severe disconnect between the public perception of things and what's actually going on, and I think they could do a lot more work to kind of bridge that gap and make things easier on themselves, but they don't seem to do it.
Yeah, I think that the overall, I kind of look at the, you know, being on both sides of the game, both as a, you know, content creator and player, as well as on the esports side. I don't think that actually changes much, because on the regular side of the game, we don't really know what's coming. We get sometimes teases, this and that, and the community has a lot of vocal opinions on how things could be done or should be done at varying different levels, that we don't really necessarily get a response. It's been getting better. It's had high points and low points, certainly. I'm not going to say that they never communicate, but like a roadmap and that kind of thing. And looking at the esports side, when it comes to the skins specifically, that one was pretty rough, because at the beginning of the year, I think that everyone was kind of been told, at least from my conversations with some of the team owners, is that PGC is going to be the time where you're going to get your skins, you're going to have your ghost branding and all that other stuff. And I think due to what I imagine was a conflict with what I believe internally is called like their premium team, like their premium development unit, like the guys that are responsible for the skins and monetization process in the game.
Okay.
It came out really close to the new season pass. And considering all the different individual skins that are included in the pass, I don't know if they wanted to necessarily be competing with team skins, but this is all just conjecture, because we'll never know for sure what the reasoning was, aside from that, looking at the revenue breakdown, that the way they did it was very lucrative for PUBG as well, because they retained, I think, half of or more so of the transactions. But you know, it also really increased the prize pool like monumentally, and not to mention a lot of these teams that did make it into the finals did see an increase in the skin money being attributed to them, essentially by user selection in the pick'ems.
Yeah. I don't know.
But a lot of people were let down too. A lot of people were upset. about this
Of
game
course,
as well.
and I mean, so I've spoken to people behind the scenes, team owners, general managers, stuff like that, and yeah, that people who have or do still compete in the game, and they're very annoyed. And I mean, I think that was almost like the final bit for some people. It's like, right, the final straw. I can't really take much more of this. So I imagine more organisations will drop out next year unless there's like drastic shifts, like based on conversations I've had at least, you know.
Right. And I mean, I've heard similar sentiments. I guess the biggest when I'm thinking about PGC in this last couple of weeks, it really did kind of glaze over the fact that between PGC and the end of NPL, I think 2 or 3 organizations dropped their rosters, and that is to add to the accounts of like Cloud9 and a bunch of other organizations on both sides of the Atlantic dropping their organizations because there's just not a way forward for monetization.
Yeah.
And if you're going to maintain this league structure with, the equivalent, like 60 plus teams across the world that could vie for a championship, having your North American league, arguably one of the weakest markets, something that you'd want to improve on, dropping their rosters repeatedly or continually, that is, it's just such a warning sign that you're not going to have an environment that seems sustainable. And I'm wondering now at this point where the competitive league or the competitive season is essentially over, what the next step is, because there was no announcements come out of PGC as to what, that would look like. Whereas in PGI last year, there was a big press conference with, I believe, the CEO saying, here's what we want to do. And this is what we learned and what we're going to look at going forward.
Yeah.
But there was none of that this year.
No, and I think that comes down to communication, but it could also be the fact that they don't have a clue themselves, like they're working things out. So of course, like you hear things behind the scenes as to what's happening, but I haven't heard anything that appears to be concrete just yet. So I guess perhaps they're like revising things. I personally think they'll try and reduce costs for themselves next year, because I mean it's obviously not cheap to be running like 6 leagues, 3 additional competitive regions, and then international and global events each year. Like especially with like low viewership and stuff like that, it's not sustainable. So it's just how long they're willing to go along with that, in my opinion.
The viewers, yeah, and the viewership thing is such a big problem because it's a non-problem, in my opinion. Like low viewership is bad, analytics bad, all that stuff. But the way that PGC was promoted could easily be done, in my opinion, regionally for the different leagues. I mean, the client itself, where you can advertise, having a specific tab or a live link is all done in other esports. Overwatch League, there's some embed questions where viewership can be tampered with, but in PUBG's case, they aren't utilizing, again, in my opinion, their best resource, which is the player base that logs into the game every day.
Yeah.
So if you can have advertisements in the client, your viewership numbers will go up. We just saw it with PGC. Now, PGC wasn't a dazzler, but it was significantly improved over the league formats and stuff like that. Not to mention the marketing push. I've never seen since PGI last year more of the community be more involved in PGC because they just simply knew about it. And it seems like a no-brainer to me. That's one of my major frustration points as both a fan, a participant, and just someone who wants to see PUBG esports succeed.
Yeah, so can you explain to me a bit about what they've done? So have they introduced, or did they introduce like super settings or like a PGC playlist or something along those lines? But and the whole labs thing that's been going on. As someone who hasn't followed it too closely, are you able to explain a bit of that for me?
Yeah, so the PUBG Labs thing is essentially a new endeavor led by, again, I'm not sure if you know him or have spoken with him, but Brian Corrigan is kind of the guy right now, which is really a breath of fresh air because we haven't really had a touch point aside from, Hawkins, who has been very, very active in the North American community.
Yeah.
But this is Brian is a developer. His team makes components of the game. So Labs is their project where they are using it to test potential additions or changes to the main game in the main client without using the test servers.
Right.
And now during PGC, they wanted to, because the community was so, at least in the competitive side, very adamant that they needed to have a competitive ranked queue, not only to bring in new talent to the esports scene, just through organic, leaderboard grinding, just the way that the entire league format or the entire competitive scene started at the very beginning of PUBG.
Yeah.
There was a competitive leaderboard. There isn't right now. So they brought this thing in, but the way it was executed was in a way that, it just said PUBG Labs, try now, and it was very small. The branding wasn't great. Their use in the client was not utilized well, and not only that, it was mentioned on Twitter, at least on Brian's account, that there was a lot of internal pushback before the mode even launched. And now, this is just my opinion, and obviously not only rooted in what I've observed, but if there was internal pushback from the beginning and the labs format was not really advertised that well and only ran for a short period of time, it didn't really feel like it was given a very fair shot at being successful.
Without a doubt.
But on top of that, they've now moved on to the skill-based matchmaking test, which just started yesterday, which is a 36-day long test.
Okay.
That will integrate skill-based matchmaking and a ranking system into the base game mode. But there's been no changes to the esports settings. So again, the big disconnect is the main community that just plays PUBG as they know it, and the esports settings, which is arguably a much better way to play the game, that has not received any attention or any push into the mainstream. And it's kind of starting to feel like it might turn around, but we don't know what the feedback looks like, because it kind of feels like PUBG relies mostly on analytics versus what might be a narrow opinion, at least in the West.
Okay, now that's interesting. It's weird how, like, okay, we'll give it a go, but only kind of we'll half-ass it. We won't do it fully. Hopefully things do turn around, because it's obviously very important, and I think it's almost imperative that people have the opportunity to experience like a real competitive setting as much as possible without going to a LAN or something, right? And if they think they're good enough to make it, then this is a good like first test for that. And then
every game needs a path to get there.
100%.
Like Counter-Strike is barely, casual mode is like a warm-up game. Everyone is playing the matchmaking mode, which is the same mode as that they play in tournaments. So in PUBG's case, if they do want truly to have a healthy esports scene long into the future, there needs to be a path for people to try it out and see. And there's a lot of battles happening there because PUBG's player count is drastically reduced, especially in North America, where, in my opinion, the game should have been free to play about a year ago to compete with likes of Apex and Fortnite, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah. Well, so I've got a bit of a theory. I wouldn't call it a hot take, but I have a bit of a theory that PUBG Mobile stands a much better chance of being like a long-term esport and a kind of thriving, healthy esport.
That's not a hot
PUBG.
take. Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying. But
that's just reality.
Yeah. A lot of people don't see it yet, though. Is more so why I'm saying it's a theory now, as opposed to just standard thought. Because I mean, I don't know how separate the teams are. I assume very separate in terms of the PUBG Mobile esports team and the PUBG esports teams.
Oh, it's a different company. Tencent,
exactly,
Tencent is, and their studio is primarily responsible, actually solely responsible, from my understanding, for all of PUBG Mobile. It is, aside from the branding, and I think probably at the executive level, a lot of meetings and game planning and stuff like that. It's a different game. It's the same game, but it's a completely different entity that is responsible for it. And there's a lot of things in PUBG Mobile that PUBG probably should start either copying or bringing over. But as far as the esports scene is concerned, it is truly massive in parts of the world. I've been to India to see what it's like, the turnout for just a Seoul university level tournament where a bunch of kids came out, formed some teams, and they packed an arena of like standing room only. It's insane how big PUBG Mobile is, and mobile esports is the future. There's no doubt in my mind.
No, I mean the fact that everybody can kind of compete as long as you've got some sort of internet connection, right? You're on a bus going to work or something, like you're on the toilet. No matter where, like for me, I'm on the toilet playing a game. You know what I mean? Like I actually play more games on the toilet than I do off of it at this point. It's just too busy. But no, so I feel like I'm not watching it particularly closely, but I'm fully expecting PUBG Mobile to be the one of the two to kind of blow up. It'll just take a bit of time, but we'll get there. So I guess we'll.
Yeah, they have a tournament going right now too. Actually, they're playing their finals in Malaysia right now, as far as I know.
Oh right, okay. Well, I went to the PM. All right, it's a really long title. PMCO Spring Season Finals or something. I don't know in Berlin. And that was crazy to see, right? It's ridiculous. I wouldn't say the audience, like the physical audience, was massive, but like the viewership outside of that, like, online viewership is ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
But
it's all over the world. It's huge.
I guess we'll shift focus onto like the PC version of the game, right? And how you think the first year has gone of like PUBG esports, like official efforts.
Yeah, I think that the especially on the tournament organizer, I have a big spot in my heart now for OGN, having watched them boot this league up, and the passion in which they did so in North America was just next to none. The value, the effort on in front of the camera and behind the camera was tremendous. I mean, just to kind of give an overview for those who are interested and maybe didn't hear this type of stuff, but OGN, not only did they, in partnership with PUBG, have top of the line hardware like 240 hertz monitors, 32 gigs of 3200 hertz RAM, the 2080s, all like really nice hardware. And the biggest thing with PUBG in the cost perspective is just how many players you have on the stage. That's times 64. So that's a huge cost by itself. But not only that, but they outfitted a long-term stay hotel with individual player practice rooms with identical hardware to what they play with on the stage. Not to mention they brought in, like, at a huge expense, like good internet for the hotel, all that stuff. But the effort level on OGN side was massive, and the player treatment and everything was huge. But my biggest critique, and I imagine StarLadder was similar in that way, and across the world, but my biggest critique was that, again, they did not do a good job advertising NPL outside of game days. Even when in the client, when there was no game day going on, you would have no idea that PUBG has an esports program at all. There's no tab for esports. There's no banner, and they had this, all the screen real estate to advertise that NPL was going on or to promote their league, and it just wasn't happening. And that was a frustration point for me because, again, all these guys, all the talent and everyone at OGN was working so hard to have this be a great production. But as the weeks went on and the phases went on, there was definite interest in the core user base that was interested in NPL, but they weren't really gaining new viewers, just in my opinion, due to lack of advertising. So if there was one thing that I wish they would change from one year to the next, is just the getting the word out, either through social channels, promotions, skin packages, drops, all the tools that are available and have been used in the wider esports industry. PUBG just has not utilized yet, and that's something I think that they could really do, or use moving forward. Just as long as they have to buy in fully to their own program, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, it was even segmented in terms of social media, right? So there's a PUBG esports account, and then Pell's got his own account, but then OGN was tweeting out like the NPL stuff, right? There's not an official NPN channel anywhere.
Yeah,
and I don't know how that works.
I think my understanding, at least for the PEL stuff, was that StarLadder requested the ability to run their own Twitter and that kind of stuff. Now, they did a good job with it, but I think that was StarLadder's request. But as far as the OGN stuff is concerned, OGN is more than NPL. Like, that was their flagship program, certainly, but OGN is new to North America. So I would also understand why they want to bolster their social channels and their market penetration just from a brand awareness standpoint. But ultimately, just the cadence of content, the website. There's a lot to manage. Like, there's 6 or more leagues that are getting a lot of traction in various parts of the world, and to have all these individuals doing it, I can see the workload, but maybe that's something that they just needed to plan for, at least in the initial stages. But maybe that'll be different for next year.
Yeah. So speaking of websites, so I wrote content, PUBG content for StarLadder for maybe 2-3 months, maybe 4 months or something, like interviewing players, and it'll go up on the PEL website. And I had to stop because payments were not coming through on time, right? And I also heard this was happening for full-time members of staff because, like, PUBG Mobile tournament prize pools had to be paid out, so it was going to be delayed for me. And I don't know how far that extends, but yeah, I definitely heard it's the case for like full-time staff members who are relying on that for a living, like working their ass off, as most people do in esports, because it's, you don't just do like 8 hours and then sign off. Like, it's go. So yeah, I messaged them, my contact there, and said, right, what's the chances of me getting paid on a particular day, which was promised at the beginning? And they said, no, it can't happen because we just can't promise it. So I kind of worry about the place in which StarLadder is. I know it's not solely a problem with just StarLadder as well, obviously. Like, there's a lot of moving parts, and operating like a CSGO major and all the other games.
It's the topic no one wants to talk about.
Honestly, I do,
because
I love talking about
it. I hear you. No, it doesn't make it a good thing. But you know, we've all, if you like, I'm new to esports. I was not in any sort of esports industry or content creating at all 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I know that I know that coming out of, you know, what is equates to regular work and into esports, the first lesson that I learned is that net 30 is a pipe dream. You know, that's not something that's going to happen very often. Now, there are some exceptions there, certainly, and it's always a nice change of pay. Shout out to PGL, by the way; they always pay on time.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I've never not been paid. But if you talk to any talent across any of the major esports, everyone has a story about, you know, really long lead times for receiving pay for an event or a piece of content or sometimes not being paid at all.
Yeah, well, James Banks, I think yesterday or the day before at the time of recording, kind of went on a bit of a Twitter rant, rightly so as well. Kind of didn't call anyone out in particular, but I mean, you can kind of guess based on who he has worked for, basically saying sometimes it's 2 months, sometimes it's 3, so it can be up to 6 and beyond, and it's just, I don't understand how they think they can get away with it for much longer. At some point, I don't know, I guess it's the leverage they've got, right? They can easily just not hire you again if you freelance.
That's the thing, and that's the biggest fear, is that if you come out and say something, you know, that you feel is right, that you'll be punished for it.
Yeah. And I've been messaging certain people, I'm not saying anyone we've mentioned already, but just saying if you ever need help getting the word out, like there are people out there who are willing to do it, you know, and hopefully not jeopardize anything, because would not like a journalist would not put something out if it's going to fuck up the situation for the source or sources, right? It's a tricky one.
But it's growing pains too, right? Hopefully in 5 years, this topic is something we look back on and be like, oh man, I'm glad that's over.
Yeah, but I don't know. I still don't think. I'm not saying you said this either, but just accepting the fact that in 5 years it'll be fine. So for now, if we just put up with it for now, I feel like we need.
I'm saying no.
I'm not putting words in your mouth. Yeah. I feel like we need someone who's just willing to bite the bullet, like jump on the grenade, you know, and just call out these people and create a change. But I would obviously never volunteer or expect anyone to do that. But I think that's what we need to at least start to see a change and a bit of accountability held on people who are doing it. And I mean, I don't know, it's a tricky one. I don't think it should be accepted. I don't think it should be like, yeah, that's fine. Whether like adding fines on, so if you don't pay within these 30 days, then each week we're adding a like X amount on. Like, I don't know if that kind of tactic's being used and utilized already, but if not, that should be an avenue people go down.
If there are esports people out there, casters, whoever, like just I can only speak for like the talent side because that's the only thing I really have experience with. So if you're on air talent and you're struggling, I would highly suggest having an agency or someone to represent you and deal with this stuff on your own, because that kind of insulates you from being the guy, out there like James, shout out to James. He's got a son, he's got a life he's got to lead, and not to mention he's doing it on his own. So having 2 or 3 months or 6 months between your paychecks I cannot imagine the stress of having someone that you're responsible for that you just can't do anything about, because what are you going to do? If you push the issue too much, you're risking your own employment in the future. So it is really a victimization, but it's like victimization through partnership. It's a very sticky situation.
Yeah, I just hope it gets sorted soon enough. So that's one struggle of being talent, right? Have you got any others that kind of stand out to you? So obviously, if you're doing like analysis, right, a lot of research has to go into that. Are all the tools always available for you to do that? For example,
Well, as far as like just within the game, well, no, it depends. I mean, it's at least my only experiences again is in PUBG. So in my opinion, a lot of the players, don't stream, they don't create content, and they just kind of, at least in North America, that's been a critique I've had for a long time. Mm-hmm. So they'll not be shocked to hear that. But also the tools available, and at least giving the people that are interested in creating content the proper tools. So I'm going to use Toby, he goes by my name is Toby, which is Toby. He's a caster and analyst for PUBG. I would love to see a guy like that have access to the tournament replay systems, which do exist. Okay. There are replays you can get and get access to remotely, but PUBG Corp has not been particularly interested in granting that access because it would be potentially infringing on player tactics. So a lot of the pro players in the pro scene has pushed back on replays being used because they don't want to have people learn too much about them, like the competition. So on both sides of the coin, there's been stifling of potential content being created out of fear on one side from the players of having their strategies exposed, and on the other side from PUBG Corp not wanting to give out access unfairly, which I can understand. You don't want to just give one guy or one individual or one entity access to something, whereas looking at like games like StarCraft, you can get replays off the launcher or something like that, or you can download them and analyze them. And some of the best content you can find is using those replays. So there's a lot of food left on the table as far as promotional opportunities that I think, at least in PUBG's case, would promote their esports, bring more content, and bridge the gap again between the player that wants to know more, or the individual that loves the game and wants to know more about the esports scene, but just does not have the resources available to go out and find it easily.
Yeah. So besides that, would you say there are any like hidden struggles as such that go into being on air talent, like broadcast talent, that say someone like myself who's never been it would not maybe know or really think about?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes. Let me tell you that. I mean, again, I came in with no experience, so all I knew, being a basketball fan, is what works for mainstream sports.
Yeah.
So my biggest piece of advice is recognize that even though you might have an opinion that you feel is right, it can cost you. So you have to figure out what you're willing to sacrifice in order to critique, let's say, the company that you're working for, or how you approach interacting with players on social media, how you portray. I'll use an example. That is a mistake that I regret even to this day, that I got caught up in, was the fact that a TSM player, his name is Iro, for the longest time had not been to a LAN. And this is a tremendously talented young man, and we know that now, but at least back then, there was a lot of concern, considering PUBG's ecosystem and the etymology and all the things that have happened regarding the cheating in PUBG, both professionally and otherwise, that there was not a consensus, but a strong section of players inside and outside the community that thought that Iro was cheating. And I made a joke or a reference to that during a LAN at one point. And at that stage, it was his first LAN. And as an individual, as a human being, I can only imagine what that would have felt like to hear an on-air talent make a joke about something like that at your first LAN.
Right.
So that's something that I didn't even think about that would affect somebody in that way. And as an individual, again, as just a person to person, that's something that I would never do again. Just even though it was a joke and just a slight reference or something like that. There is always a time and place for that kind of thing, but it's about the players almost all the time. The talent, and some talent get caught up in just being the best that they can be, and sometimes making them about themselves. That's a mistake that I think everyone's going to trip over. But in the case of just recognizing that your words have impact and your actions have impact on both sides of the game, both on individuals as well as yourself. Is something that every talent needs to consider. Like, what are you getting into it for? Are you getting into it for yourself, or are you getting into it for the love of the game? And there's always going to be a bit of egomania in the talent side of things. So just be careful. Don't get lost in it, and just be true to what you think is best, and that's promoting the game you're covering.
Yeah. So obviously you create content, you stream and upload videos, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned not too long ago that players in PUBG North America specifically don't tend to do that too much.
Some do. Some do. Well, I would say shout out to K Mind, who was, I think, the biggest draw as an individual player, but he's moved over to Europe now, so that's a resource we're going to lose. But yeah, there's been a lot of opportunity, and in some cases, guys have built their followings from the ground up just based on just clicking the go live button, which is all you really need to do if you're really talented like these pros are.
Yeah. How important do you think that is? Both, I guess, on a player side, it's kind of obvious, but I guess anyone in general, right? So if you're working for a company, they can take everything away from you in a second, right? But if you have, they can really, especially if you speak out against them, for example. But content creation is something you basically, and for yourself, obviously, you're uploading to YouTube and streaming on Twitch, but it's your content and it's separate from an employee.
It's your stuff. It's your parachute, in my opinion. I started as a content creator. I took 2 years, most of the last 2 years off of what would I consider a regular cadence of created stuff that I'm making. I have an editor that cuts up my gameplay videos and stuff for me.
Yeah.
But I haven't really had the same chance to make that stuff, and I'll say this now, only because, and this is more of a cautionary tale than anything else, but you do have to be mindful of how you approach certain topics as talent. Like if you're going to do both, I really encourage anyone who's in esports, make your own content, stream, have a following that is there for you, because eventually, something will change, either your ability to go to events or the willingness of a game company to put up with certain content creators and their opinions on the game and stuff like that. And eventually they'll stop inviting you to stuff. But if you have that as a base and you can go back to that and build it, and, it's something that if that esports contract goes away, which for some is the only income they have and the only thing connecting them to full-time esports is a singular contract. If that goes away for some reason, what is your next step? If you can't find another contract, or the league you're playing in dries up, I'm looking at the H1 Pro League guys.
Yeah.
There's always got to be a parachute, and there's no better way to do that, especially with the demand for content and the shakeup in the streaming world right now. Get out there. If you're truly talented and you have the ability to formulate even moderately entertaining sentences, you absolutely should be streaming. A good example in the PUBG community is Tiggleton. He plays for the Sonics.
Yeah.
He started just with 5 viewers, and he's making traction. He's getting featured, and it only came because of hard work. And in my case, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I have that content.
No, without a doubt, I think it makes sense, and I think we'll see a shift to more people doing it, right? I mean, it's not too costly for this, for example. I just bought a mic setup and I've got a laptop. It's not expensive at all. I already had the laptop for work and gaming and stuff, right? So, I mean, it doesn't take too much to get going. Over time, if it starts becoming something that you're popular in and you're good at, you can upgrade. But yeah, yep. I think sometimes, a lot of the time with most things in life, it's the hardest thing to do is just starting. Just saying, right, I'm actually just going to do this and go for it and not care what other people think and see how it goes. Obviously,
Absolutely.
It doesn't always work out. My podcast could end after 5 episodes because no one's watched it. Who knows? But
it's very possible.
I don't know. Oh, thank you for that. It's very possible.
Well, what I'm trying to say, I guess, to add on to that is that it's possible that no one will watch. It's actually kind of feasible that no one will watch, because everything, my first couple of videos, my first couple of streams were nothing. I was sitting there talking to myself, and then there comes a time where one guy shows up, and then maybe another guy does. Next thing you know, 6 months down the road, if you're doing the right things, you're being regular, you're getting past that initial hump of no one's watching this, then you have to either get better, learn, or stop. And I honestly think that the first two are probably better options if you really truly want to be successful and make something for yourself.
Of course. Right, so I've got one more question, and I will let you go. Right, so I assume you think PUBG is the best battle royale game, right?
Or that's a very complicated question. I mean,
is it your favorite game then?
As far as a battle royale is concerned, in my genre of games, which is FPS shooters, I don't think there's a better competitor for a semi-realistic. The gunplay in PUBG is still to this day unmatched, in my opinion. I think that, obviously Counter-Strike would be another big one there, but purely from a satisfaction standpoint, PUBG does have the best gunplay, and because that's important to me as an FPS gamer,
Right.
I do believe it's the best shooter battle royale out there. As far as the best battle royale,
Yeah.
I don't think you can take that title away from Fortnite anytime soon, just considering how they've marketed, managed, and evolved their game on a month-to-month basis over the last couple of years.
No, that's fine. I was trying to get you to completely slander the other titles, but it didn't work out. I just thought I'd
honestly,
say,
man, like it's such it was a new genre and it exploded.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that honestly PUBG wasn't ready for. I think that if they had known that they were going to sell 50 million copies in the first year, they probably would have pushed the release back a couple of months for early access, just because the amount of weight that level of success must bring down upon what I believe was like a 15-person development team.
Right. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
It's got to be scary.
Like, that's ridiculous. But so I guess if you look at how far it's come as a whole, like it's supporting people creating content, like it's all these leagues and such, and there's global championships going on. And I know I've been pretty critical, but I do, of course, I hope things work out. I hope things get a lot better and it becomes a top tier esport. Like that's fine, whether I like the game or not. Like obviously, I just want the whole industry to do better, you know. And the more competitors there are in terms of games, the more development teams are such a push to do more and to do better. And I think that's what Fortnite did quite well. It kind of kicked everyone up the arse a little bit, and helped people to revise some things.
Something that I try to say a lot and to remember myself, even though, you know, there is a lot of valid criticisms as to how PUBG operates both their game and their esports program. I recognize that there are people on the other side as well that are doing the best they can with the direction they're receiving, or the guy at the very top has got, you know, just trying to do their best. And again, they are still in a position where they are fleshing out their infrastructure, trying to make the game as functional and accessible as possible, tackling competition. You know, it is a very difficult process. I can only imagine. You know, it's very easy for me to sit in my room here and say, well, you got to do more. Mm-hmm. But, you know, they're all human. They all have kids and families and jobs and they, you know, dreams and desires just like everybody else. And that is something that I always keep in mind, and everyone should keep in mind, regardless of the genre of game or the title you're following, is that there are other people that you could potentially be, again, you know, affecting with how you approach criticism. So I would never say someone needs to get fired, but some things do need to change.
I will agree with that, and I'll keep it there before I get in trouble. So, thank you very much for coming on. Would you like to tell people where they can find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on all social at wtfmoses on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, you name it. I'm there. I stream all the time. I'm making content all the time, and maybe someday I'll be back to casting PUBG all the time too. So hopefully I'll see you guys out there real soon.
Fingers crossed for you. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. I'm by Adam Fitch everywhere. Subscribe if you want to see more. I'm planning on doing this weekly, and I'm pretty consistent with stuff. So yeah, if you like what you've just listened or watched, then feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.